In the soft chill of an English winter, beneath a sky dimmed by the pale silver of distant stars, a child was born who would one day gaze farther into the universe than most could dream. It was January 8, 1942, exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei, a date that would later feel like more than coincidence. In a quiet corner of Oxford, a city still marked by the echoes of war, Stephen William Hawking entered a world trying to rebuild itself, a world caught between old certainties and new possibilities. His parents, Frank and Isabel, were people of quiet intellect and unassuming depth. Frank was a medical researcher, a man drawn to the mysteries of biology and the hidden mechanisms of life. Isabel had worked as a secretary for a medical research institute, practical, thoughtful, and remarkably independent for her time. Together they represented the kind of gentle curiosity that would form the foundation of Stephen's own character. The family home in the early years was far from grand. Books lined every wall, sometimes stacked in uneven towers across the floor. The air carried the faint scent of ink and paper, the weight of thought always near. There was often quiet, not silence but a stillness filled with thinking. The ticking of a clock, the soft hum of a kettle, pages turning under lamplight. For a child like Stephen, this world of contemplation was fertile ground. Even as a boy, he was fascinated by how things worked. He would take apart clocks, radios, and toys, not to break them, but to understand the rhythm hidden inside their mechanisms. His curiosity was never satisfied with surfaces. He wanted to see the logic that lived beneath, the order that gave shape to motion. Sometimes, when his parents found a device dismantled on the floor, they would sigh, but there was always a quiet smile behind their disapproval. They knew he was reaching for something, a language of patterns, a way to decode how the universe whispered to itself. In St. Albans, where the family later moved, Stephen's childhood unfolded among tree-lined streets and quiet gardens. The world outside seemed ordinary, yet to him every shadow, every sound held a question. The whisper of wind through leaves became a small experiment in chaos and order. The shape of the stars above, dim yet persistent through England's cloudy nights, awakened an early sense of wonder. His parents nurtured that curiosity with patience. Meals at the Hawking table were often long and filled with conversation, not the usual chatter of daily life, but reflections on science, politics, and philosophy. Sometimes they read as they ate, each absorbed in thought, the clinking of cutlery punctuating the rhythm of turning pages. For a sensitive and perceptive child, it was an education in itself. That thought was something living, something to be tended quietly, like a flame in the dark. The early 1940s and 50s were a time of change in Britain, a country recovering from war, rediscovering itself through invention and rebuilding. Rationing lingered, resources were scarce, but ideas for those like the Hawkings were abundant. In this modest environment, Stephen learned one of his most enduring lessons, that the richness of the mind could transcend material simplicity. When he began school, Stephen was not immediately recognized as extraordinary. In fact, by some accounts he was slow to read, and his handwriting was untidy. Teachers noted his curiosity, but not his diligence. He preferred questions to answers, and often, the structure of lessons felt too confined for his restless imagination. Yet within that subtle rebellion there was something forming, a mind unwilling to accept the limits of established thought. He was close to his mother, who encouraged his independence and imagination. She would take him on long walks beneath the shifting skies of Hertfordshire, where the air smelled of damp grass and distant rain. They would talk, sometimes about nature, sometimes about nothing at all. The world to young Stephen felt vast and intimate all at once. It was a place where time moved gently, and where each moment carried quiet meaning. At home, he began to build things, small mechanical contraptions, model airplanes, simple experiments that turned the living room into a laboratory. He would gather his friends and assign them roles in imaginary scientific projects, scribbling equations that made little sense but gave him joy. They called him Einstein, half in jest, yet somehow the nickname seemed to fit. Even then, the pattern of curiosity and humor intertwined, a balance he would keep all his life. As the years passed, the questions grew more complex. Why did things move? Why did the universe have rules? Could everything, even time, be explained through reason? There were no clear answers, only the comforting feeling that somewhere hidden behind the veil of the ordinary, there was a profound harmony waiting to be understood. The quiet domestic scenes of his early life were often framed by sound. The faint rumble of trains in the distance, rain against the windows, the creak of the old wooden floor. Each sound seemed to mark time not as something fixed, but as a gentle current flowing through the edges of perception. Perhaps it was here, long before his formal study of cosmology, that Stephen began to sense time as something fluid, a dimension not merely to be measured, but to be experienced. In the evenings, when the house settled into silence, Stephen would sometimes lie awake, his thoughts tracing patterns in the dark. He imagined space not as emptiness, but as a vast ocean of hidden energy. The stars became companions, silent witnesses to the questions blooming inside him. What lay beyond them? Was there an end to space, or did it curve back on itself? At that tender age, such thoughts were not calculations but dreams, soft beginnings of a lifelong dialogue with the cosmos. The post-war world around him was still shaped by uncertainty. The Cold War had begun to shadow global consciousness, and the future of science seemed both luminous and perilous. Great advances were being made, in nuclear physics, in space exploration. Yet they carried an undertone of fear. For a boy with a natural inclination toward reflection, this tension between discovery and destruction left a quiet mark. Knowledge, he would later realize, was never neutral. It carried responsibility. The same light that could illuminate could also burn. But in those first years, his world was smaller, gentler. Books became his constellations. He read about mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, sometimes beyond his comprehension. Yet he lingered over the words, absorbing their rhythm. The language of the universe was still out of reach, but he sensed its presence, like a melody heard through a wall. As adolescence approached, Stephen's interests deepened into science more formally. He and a few friends formed what they jokingly called the Department of Mathematics. They met in secret corners of school or in each other's homes, discussing imaginary experiments, building makeshift devices, and sketching theories that defied the simplicity of their age. There was laughter, there were mistakes, but most of all, there was shared wonder. These small, playful gatherings were the seeds of the scientist he would become, someone who believed that curiosity was a form of joy. Even in those days, there was something serene about his approach to the unknown. He did not rush toward answers. He lingered in questions, savoring their mystery. That quality, quiet yet powerful, would one day define his entire philosophy of science. At home, time seemed to move differently. The house was old, with walls that seemed to listen. Frank Hawking would often retreat into his research, Isabel into her books, and Stephen into his dreams of stars. The family, though sometimes eccentric in the eyes of neighbors, shared an invisible bond, a reverence for knowledge and an acceptance of life's strangeness. On certain nights, when the moonlight filtered through the curtains and painted pale lines across the floor, Stephen would feel something indescribable, a sense that he was part of something vast and ancient. It was not ambition he felt, nor the hunger for achievement, but a peaceful curiosity, a quiet belief that the universe, though complex, was knowable, and that even in its silence, it was speaking to those who listened. Years later, when asked about his childhood, Stephen would describe it as happy, even ordinary. Yet in that ordinariness lay a rare seed, the harmony of intellect and stillness, of curiosity and calm. It was the soil from which his genius would grow, not in sudden bursts, but in slow, patient unfolding. The boy who once dismantled clocks to understand their workings would one day dismantle the very concept of time. But in these earliest years, he was simply a dreamer beneath the English sky, guided by gentle parents, a mind awakening, and a quiet sense that somewhere beyond the stars, the universe was waiting to be understood. And so beneath that quiet roof in St. Albans, the journey began. not with noise or brilliance, but with silence, patience, and the delicate rhythm of a mind beginning to listen to the cosmos. There is a certain calm that settles over a person in adolescence, a quiet expansion of awareness, a dawning sense that the world is both immense and interconnected. For Stephen Hawking, this was not merely an emotional awakening, but an intellectual one. The restless curiosity of his childhood deepened into something more deliberate, a desire not only to know, but to understand. In St. Albans School, where he began to shape his sense of self, Stephen was surrounded by tradition, ancient halls, stone corridors, and classrooms where chalk dust seemed to hang in the air like memory. The building itself was a relic of English education, orderly, dignified, and quietly intimidating. Yet within those walls, Stephen felt both inspired and detached. He admired knowledge, but he resisted conformity. Rules were necessary, but he preferred discovery. His teachers saw potential, though perhaps not brilliance, at least not yet. He was sometimes untidy, occasionally distracted, and often amused by his own imagination. But beneath that surface humor, there was a remarkable depth of thought. Mathematics, physics, and logic became languages he could think in, each one offering a different way to ask the same eternal question. Why does the universe exist at all? Outside of class, Stephen spent long hours in quiet study, not for grades or recognition, but for the joy of mental adventure. Books became his companions, especially those that dared to look at the universe differently. He read the works of philosophers and scientists whose names lingered like stars in his imagination: Newton, Faraday, Einstein. These thinkers were not just sources of knowledge to him, they were voices from another realm, whispering through the centuries, reminding him that human thought could reach beyond the boundaries of the visible world. At times, Stephen's curiosity had a mischievous edge. He loved solving problems in unconventional ways, or challenging ideas simply to test their strength. There was, even then, a sense of play in his approach to the unknown. He once built simple mathematical puzzles to amuse his friends, turning logic into a kind of game. This balance between intellect and humor, between precision and playfulness, would remain one of the defining qualities of his mind. In those years, science began to bloom across the world in a new light. The 1950s were a period of profound change, a time when humankind was beginning to look outward, toward the stars. The first rockets were reaching beyond the atmosphere, and whispers of space exploration filled the newspapers. For a boy like Stephen, this was a golden age of imagination. The idea that humans could touch the cosmos was not merely thrilling. It was a sign that knowledge itself had wings. Sometimes at dusk, he would stand outside and gaze up at the sky, tracing the faint paths of satellites as they crossed the night. They moved slowly, like thoughts drifting through darkness. He would imagine what it must be like to float there, beyond the pull of Earth, looking down on the blue curve of the planet. In those moments, something stirred in him. A quiet yearning to understand not only the stars but the laws that govern their dance. At school, his circle of friends was small but close-knit. They were thoughtful, curious, and sometimes rebellious in their own quiet way. Together they shared laughter, long talks, and the comforting company of minds that wondered alike. They read science fiction and philosophy, debated abstract questions, and built makeshift contraptions that rarely worked but always fascinated them. One friend later recalled that Stephen seemed to approach every question as if it were a riddle posed by the universe itself. His teachers began to notice the precision in his reasoning. Though he did not always shine in rote learning, he had an unusual ability to see patterns, to intuit how things fit together without following each step in the usual order. He could solve complex problems not by memorization, but by insight. It was as if he saw mathematics as a landscape, one he could navigate by instinct. Despite his growing passion for science, there was also a human softness in Stephen. He had a quiet sense of empathy and an appreciation for beauty, in ideas, in nature, and in simple things. He enjoyed music, particularly classical compositions that carried a sense of vastness and order. The rhythm of Bach or the calm precision of Mozart seemed to echo the very symmetry he later sought in the cosmos. In the gentle repetition of melody, he felt a mirror of the universe's design, harmonious, infinite, and full of subtle variation. His home life continued to nurture his imagination. The Hawking household remained a place where thought was cherished. Discussions about science and philosophy filled the evenings, yet laughter was never far away. His father's fascination with biology contrasted with Stephen's growing interest in physics, and sometimes their conversations became gentle debates. The living and the cosmic, the cell and the star. Isabel, ever supportive, would listen quietly, her eyes glimmering with pride as her son's curiosity unfolded into something profound. There were challenges, too. Moments when the world seemed too slow for his thoughts, or when others failed to see the beauty he found in abstract reasoning. But even these frustrations were tempered by patience. He was learning the value of persistence. That understanding often comes not in leaps, but in slow, deliberate unfolding. In school, Stephen's sense of humor made him well-liked, even among those who found his intellect intimidating. He was never arrogant. Instead, he carried his intelligence lightly, often deflecting praise with a joke. This humility, gentle and genuine, would become one of his most endearing qualities throughout life. There was one teacher in particular who recognized something extraordinary in Stephen. His mathematics instructor, aware of the spark behind his calm demeanor, encouraged him to think beyond the curriculum. Under this guidance, Stephen began to glimpse what mathematics could truly be, not merely numbers and equations, but a way of seeing reality itself. He learned that mathematics was the language of nature, the quiet code behind every motion, every beam of light, every curve of space and time. In those reflective school years, he also began to sense the loneliness that sometimes accompanies deep thought. Intellectual curiosity can be isolating, not because others reject it, but because few share its depth. Yet rather than retreat into solitude, Stephen found comfort in reflection. He began to understand that solitude was not emptiness, but a space where ideas could breathe. Occasionally, he would visit the countryside with his family, where fields stretched endlessly under the soft English sky. He loved those landscapes, the gentle roll of the hills, the quiet rhythm of wind through the grass. It reminded him that nature itself was the greatest teacher. Watching clouds drift across the horizon, he would wonder how something so ephemeral could be governed by such precise laws. Even then, the balance between chaos and order fascinated him, a theme that would one day become central to his work on black holes and the origins of the universe. In these adolescent years, time seemed to flow with a strange grace. The boy who once took apart clocks now began to feel time not as something mechanical, but as something mysterious. Days passed gently, seasons changed, yet behind every passing moment he sensed the quiet movement of something deeper, the fabric of existence itself. By the time Stephen reached his mid-teens, his sense of identity as a thinker had begun to crystallize. The world, to him, was not a stage of random events, but a symphony of laws waiting to be heard. He could not yet articulate it in equations or theories, but he felt it, the deep coherence of the cosmos. And in that feeling there was peace. His grades improved steadily, though not spectacularly. What truly set him apart was not performance, but perception. He was beginning to see the invisible architecture of reality, to sense that behind every visible thing lay an order more intricate than any human design. In these years, a quiet pattern began to form in his life. Curiosity followed by reflection, discovery followed by humility. Each question led to another. Each realization deepened his wonder. There was never a sense of finality in his thinking, only a calm understanding that knowledge was an infinite horizon. When he completed his schooling, Stephen's path seemed clear to those who knew him well. He was destined for the sciences, though perhaps not yet aware of the magnitude of his future. What he carried with him into the next stage of life was not ambition, but devotion, a serene faith in reason, and a love for the universe as both mystery and companion. He stood at the edge of youth, ready to step into the wider world, a world that would soon test him in ways unimaginable. But in that quiet threshold between adolescence and adulthood, Stephen Hawking was still simply a young dreamer, looking at the night sky, feeling its vastness fold gently around him. The stars did not intimidate him. They invited him. And beneath their light, a thought was forming. That to understand the universe was not only to measure it, but to listen to its silence. The world seemed larger when Stephen Hawking arrived at Oxford in 1959. The city, with its honey-colored stone and centuries-old spires, had the quiet majesty of a place shaped by thought itself. The air was filled with the faint scent of damp stone and old books, the murmur of bicycles gliding along cobbled streets, and the soft chiming of college bells marking time as if it were a living thing. Stephen had just turned 17. He was young even by the standards of his peers and carried with him a quiet shyness that masked a sharp and restless intellect. Oxford was not simply a university to him. It was a new world, one filled with questions, traditions, and possibilities as vast as the universe he longed to understand. He entered University College, the same college that had once turned away Albert Einstein for failing to meet their standards. It was an irony that time would later smile upon. Stephen's early days there were marked by an odd balance of curiosity and hesitation. The grandeur of the place, its long academic lineage, felt both inspiring and intimidating. Yet within weeks, he began to settle into the rhythm of academic life, a rhythm that to him was almost musical in its order. His chosen field was natural science, but his true love was physics, the elegant pursuit of the rules that governed all things. In lectures, he sat quietly, taking sparse notes, his mind wandering far beyond the words being spoken. He was not drawn to memorization or rigid systems of knowledge. Instead, he sought meaning in patterns. He could see relationships between concepts that others missed, leaping from idea to idea with the same fluid grace that light travels through space. At first, his professors were unsure what to make of him. His assignments were sometimes late, his handwriting untidy, his demeanor calm, but detached. Yet when he spoke, rarely but with precision, his insights startled even the most experienced tutors. He had the peculiar gift of seeing through complexity to find simplicity. He could think in shapes, one fellow student later recalled. Where the rest of us saw symbols, Stephen saw geometry. Oxford in the early 1960s was a place suspended between tradition and revolution. The post-war generation was beginning to question old structures, to see science not as the possession of a few, but as a shared human endeavor. There was music in the air, jazz spilling from college bars, classical symphonies echoing through old halls, and in that atmosphere of youthful openness, Stephen thrived. He joined the university's boat club, not as a rower but as a coxswain, the one who steers the boat and keeps the rhythm. His voice, calm and confident, carried across the river, guiding his crew through the slow pulse of the water. It was one of the few physical pursuits he truly enjoyed, though it came with risk. The boat often collided with others, sometimes because of his daring calls. Yet those moments of adventure mirrored something deeper in him, the courage to take intellectual risks, to navigate chaos with quiet confidence. Stephen's social life at Oxford was lively, though understated. He formed a circle of friends who admired his humor and wit. He could make people laugh with a single dry remark, yet he never sought the spotlight. His laughter was light, sometimes self-effacing, and always sincere. Even in moments of competition or tension, he remained composed, preferring reason over emotion. Despite his growing reputation as a thinker, Stephen's academic path was not without uncertainty. During his first 2 years, he did not apply himself with full intensity. The work came easily to him, and he sometimes found the pace too slow, the curriculum too constrained. He preferred late-night discussions over formal study, those long, drifting conversations about the universe, time, and infinity. He would lean back in his chair, eyes distant but alive, as if watching equations unfold behind his gaze. The physics laboratory became his quiet sanctuary. There, under the soft hum of electric lights and the faint scent of chemicals, Stephen felt most at peace. The tools of experimentation fascinated him less than the theories behind them. To him, physics was poetry, a language that translated the music of the cosmos into human understanding. One evening, while walking alone through the quadrangle, he paused to look at the stars above the spire of Radcliffe Camera. The night air was crisp, and the faint glow of the city could not dim the distant constellations. He thought of Galileo and Newton, of Einstein bending time in his equations, and of the ancient question that still lingered in every human heart. What is the nature of reality? In that stillness, he realized that science was not only about discovery, it was about connection. Every equation was a conversation between the mind and the universe, a bridge across time and space. The stars were not distant. They were part of the same unfolding story, and he, a quiet young man with untidy hair and bright eyes, was somehow woven into it. In his final year, Stephen's natural brilliance began to shine in ways that could no longer be overlooked. His understanding of physics deepened, his mathematical intuition became sharper, and his essays, though often minimal, revealed insights that startled even his professors. His final exams were a crucial test. For the first time, he applied himself fully, recognizing that his future depended on the outcome. Oxford examinations were known for their rigor and their subtle cruelty, designed not only to test knowledge but to test calm under pressure. Stephen approached them with his characteristic blend of humor and serenity. When asked orally about theoretical physics, he responded with the clarity of someone who saw the structure of the universe rather than merely calculated it. The examiners conferred, uncertain of his exact placement. Was he a borderline first-class student or a strong second? When called in for a personal interview, Stephen faced them with quiet composure. One of the professors asked him directly, "Tell us, where do you think you should stand?" He paused, a faint smile crossing his face. "If I get a first," he said softly, "I'll go to Cambridge. If I get a second, I'll stay here at Oxford." The room fell into silence, and then, perhaps amused or impressed by his calm confidence, they awarded him a first-class degree. That moment was a turning point. The quiet ignition of a path that would lead him toward the great questions of cosmology. Cambridge awaited him, the center of gravitational research, where minds like Denis Sciama were exploring the nature of the universe's beginning. Stephen's decision was made. He would step into a deeper unknown, carrying with him the gentle certainty that the cosmos was not chaos, but harmony, waiting to be heard. As he packed his few belongings, mostly books, papers, and a small radio, there was no sense of triumph in him, only a still anticipation. He was leaving behind the cloistered calm of Oxford for something larger, something that would soon test his intellect and eventually his spirit. He walked one last time through the college grounds, past the ivy-covered walls and the shadowed archways where he had once lingered with friends. The bells tolled softly in the distance. He looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars had begun to shimmer. Somewhere in that expanse he felt the answers already existed, silent, patient, waiting to be found. And as he stepped beyond the gates of Oxford, the young scholar carried not just knowledge but wonder, the quiet conviction that understanding the universe was, in itself, a form of love. The autumn of 1962 arrived with a soft hush over England, leaves turning gold and rust beneath a pale sky, the air filled with that particular stillness that precedes great change. For Stephen Hawking, it was the season of transition. He was 20 years old, standing at the threshold of a new chapter. After the tranquil rhythm of Oxford, he was stepping into the intellectual storm of Cambridge, a place where questions about the cosmos were no longer distant curiosities but living pursuits. Cambridge was ancient and alive at once. Its river, the Cam, flowed like a quiet thought between its colleges, reflecting arches and trees heavy with autumn light. The air smelled faintly of rain and stone, and bicycles clicked softly over cobblestones. To an observer, it might have seemed an ordinary academic landscape, but for Stephen, it was something else entirely. The edge of the universe, drawn into human form. He came to study cosmology under Denis Sciama, one of the great minds of the era. Sciama had been a student of Paul Dirac, whose equations had bridged the gap between quantum mechanics and relativity. Now Sciama was turning his attention to the grandest of questions, How did the universe begin? What governed its structure and its fate? It was under this guidance that Stephen's own understanding of the cosmos would begin to crystallize. The first weeks at Cambridge were quiet. Stephen, shy but composed, spent much of his time alone, wandering through the courtyards of Trinity Hall and Gonville and Caius College, listening to the soft echo of footsteps against stone. He would pause on bridges and look at the slow-moving river, watching the ripples fold into one another like equations made visible. The city itself seemed to breathe in a steady, timeless rhythm, and he found comfort in its calm predictability. But within his mind, something had begun to accelerate. He was drawn to questions of time, gravity, and the origins of the universe, ideas vast and weightless, yet heavy with mystery. He read voraciously, sometimes deep into the night, his lamp burning long after others had gone to sleep. His notes were sparse, his handwriting difficult, yet the thoughts behind them carried extraordinary depth. He did not merely study the theories of others. He engaged with them, challenged them, sought their limits. His relationship with Sayama soon developed into something more than that of student and teacher. Sayama had an instinct for recognizing emerging genius, and he sensed in Stephen a rare clarity of thought. Their discussions were long and unhurried, conversations about the fabric of reality, about whether the universe had a beginning, or whether it stretched infinitely into the past. Stephen's responses were measured and calm, yet often startling in their simplicity. He began to see the universe not as a static creation, but as something dynamic, expanding, evolving, perhaps even destined for both birth and decay. He had not yet found the mathematics to describe it, but his intuition was already circling truths that would later become the foundation of his legacy. The early 1960s were a time of great excitement in cosmology. Observations by Edwin Hubble had shown that galaxies were receding from one another, evidence that the universe itself was expanding. The Big Bang theory was beginning to gain traction, yet many physicists resisted it, preferring the steadiness of a steady-state universe, eternal and unchanging. Stephen watched this debate unfold with quiet fascination. To him, the universe's beginning was not a question of belief, but of logic. If it was expanding, it must once have been smaller, perhaps infinitely small. And what then existed at that point? That question, so deceptively simple, would follow him for the rest of his life. His days were disciplined, but gentle. He attended lectures, engaged in debates, and spent long afternoons cycling through the city, the wind brushing against his face as he thought in silence. There was a certain peace in motion, a rhythm that allowed ideas to drift and settle. He often found that his clearest thoughts came not at his desk, but on those quiet rides along the river, where the world seemed to blur into a continuous stream of light and reflection. Evenings in Cambridge carried their own serenity, the sound of bells at twilight, the faint rustle of trees, the lamplight glowing through old windows. All of it formed a backdrop for thought. He would often join friends for small gatherings where discussions flowed freely between physics, philosophy, and life. There was laughter, too, a gentle warmth that counterbalanced the immensity of their ideas. Despite his growing immersion in theory, Stephen never lost his sense of wonder. He spoke often of how nature seemed to weave its own elegance. He would say, almost to himself, "It is not just that the universe works, it is that it works beautifully." That sentiment, quiet, humble, and profound, reflected his belief that science was not merely about solving mysteries, but about honoring the mystery itself. Yet even amid the calm of intellectual life, subtle changes were beginning to unfold within him, small, almost imperceptible signs that his body was no longer responding as it once did. He noticed at first that he was becoming slightly clumsy. His balance felt uncertain when he walked, and his hands sometimes trembled when he wrote. He brushed it aside, attributing it to fatigue or distraction. After all, he was young, healthy, and deeply absorbed in his work. But as the months passed, the symptoms persisted. Friends noticed that he stumbled occasionally or had trouble fastening his shoelaces. One evening, while ice skating with companions, he fell awkwardly and could not easily get up. The laughter that followed was gentle, unaware that something deeper might be wrong. Stephen did not speak much about it. He continued his studies, focusing on cosmology with increasing intensity, as if his mind sought to compensate for what his body could not yet articulate. There was something almost prophetic in that quiet determination, the calm before a storm that neither he nor anyone around him could yet foresee. In the lectures of that period, he began to contemplate the concept of singularities, points in space where the laws of physics seemed to break down. Black holes, he learned, might represent such points, regions where gravity became infinite and time ceased to behave in familiar ways. The idea fascinated him. To Stephen, a singularity was not merely a physical boundary but a philosophical one, the edge of what could be known. In quiet moments, he would stare at the chalkboard, tracing invisible shapes with his finger, as though trying to feel the texture of space-time itself. Could the entire universe have begun as a singularity? Could time itself have had an origin, a moment when, before, ceased to exist? He did not yet have the answers, but the questions began to burn softly in him, like stars forming from darkness. Through that first year, he continued to live simply. His room was modest, cluttered with papers and books, a kettle for tea, and the quiet hum of a small radio playing softly in the background. Outside his window, the evenings would grow long and blue, the sound of footsteps fading as the college settled into silence. It was in these hours that he felt most at peace, surrounded by equations and ideas that stretched far beyond the limits of sight. Sometimes, when the night was very still, he would write in the faint glow of his desk lamp, pausing to listen to the ticking of a small clock. The sound reminded him of childhood, of dismantled timepieces and the mysteries that once lived inside them. Now he was learning that time itself might be dismantled, understood, and even reimagined. He could not have known then how short and how vast his own time would become. But perhaps he sensed it, faintly, the idea that life, like the universe, is defined not by its duration, but by its depth. And so, in the quiet chambers of Cambridge beneath skies that mirrored the endless unknown, Stephen Hawking's journey into the fabric of reality truly began. A journey that would lead him not away from mystery but into its very heart. Winter crept slowly over Cambridge in 1963. The air turned crisp and pale. Frost traced fragile patterns along the college windows each morning. Stephen Hawking, now immersed in his graduate studies, lived quietly within this rhythm, his mind fixed on the structure of the universe, his body beginning to whisper of changes he could not yet name. His world had always been one of quiet precision, days spent in libraries and lecture halls, evenings at small gatherings, late nights under the soft hum of a desk lamp. Yet gradually he began to sense that something inside him was shifting. His fingers would fail to grip the chalk firmly. His speech sometimes slurred when he was tired. And more than once he found himself falling without understanding why. It was subtle, almost invisible to others, but to him, it was undeniable. Still, he resisted concern. There was too much to think about, too many questions still unanswered. The universe, after all, did not wait for frailty. He had begun exploring an idea that would change cosmology forever. The notion that singularities, those mysterious points of infinite density, might not just exist inside black holes, but could also mark the birth of the universe itself. Working with the foundational equations of general relativity, Stephen realized something extraordinary. If the universe was expanding now, then by tracing it backward through time, one would eventually reach a state of infinite compression. A single point, a beginning. In his quiet room, he would stare at his notes for hours, the paper filled with swirling equations. Around him, the sound of the city faded into stillness. The universe, he thought, could have emerged from such a singularity, from nothing, a point where all laws, all measurements, all certainty collapsed. And from that nothingness, everything was born. It was both terrifying and beautiful. He discussed the idea with his supervisor, Dennis Siama, who encouraged him to pursue it further. Siama saw in Stephen a mind unbound by the assumptions that limited others. He was unafraid to question the impossible. Yet Syama also noticed the growing tremor in his student's hands, the unsteady steps. He asked about it once, gently. Stephen brushed it off with a half-smile. "Just clumsy," he said. But soon, even he could no longer ignore it. After one particularly bad fall during Christmas break, his parents persuaded him to see a doctor. Tests followed. Long, quiet examinations, electrical impulses traced across muscles, subtle measurements of reflex and motion. Days turned into weeks. He returned to Cambridge, waiting, uncertain. Then, one winter afternoon, he sat in a sterile white room, the hum of fluorescent lights above him, as a doctor spoke words that would reshape his life forever. "You have a motor neuron disease, a form of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis." The explanation unfolded with clinical detachment, that his muscles would continue to weaken, that his ability to move, to speak, to breathe, would slowly fade. There was no cure. The expected lifespan, the doctor said softly, was perhaps 2 years. Stephen listened in silence. He nodded once, as though absorbing the information not emotionally but mathematically. It was another fact, another condition of existence. Yet beneath the composure, the shock was absolute. 2 years. 21 years old. He returned to his college room that evening and sat alone for a long time. Outside, the wind whispered against the glass, and the light of distant windows flickered across the courtyard. The world, which had always seemed infinite, suddenly felt unbearably small. For days he withdrew. His studies paused. He avoided friends. The future, once vast and open, now seemed sealed. What meaning could equations hold when time itself was so short? He described later that he dreamed often in that period, dreams of being executed, of dying without understanding what came next. Yet in those same dreams, he also saw the universe as a vast, expanding light, and himself as part of it, fleeting but connected. Then, something changed. At a New Year's Eve party, he met Jane Wilde, a young student of modern languages. She was warm, graceful, and filled with quiet strength. They spoke only briefly that night, but something in her kindness lingered with him afterward. When she later learned of his illness, she did not withdraw. Instead, she drew closer. "We'll make it work," she told him. "We'll live as if every day matters." Those words became a quiet turning point. Stephen began to study again, slowly at first, then with renewed vigor. The despair that had weighed on him began to shift into focus, a calm, fierce clarity that would define the rest of his life. If time was limited, then every thought, every question, every discovery mattered infinitely more. He returned to his research on singularities with a sense of urgency and wonder. In the silence of his room, equations became his language of survival. He explored how Einstein's theory of general relativity might predict not only singularities, but also the conditions under which they form, how gravity could compress matter and energy into points where space-time itself curved beyond recognition. It was as if, in exploring the boundaries of the universe, he was also exploring the boundaries of himself. His illness advanced slowly. His speech became slightly less clear, his movements more deliberate. Friends began to notice, but they also noticed something else. His humor remained untouched. He joked easily, sometimes at his own expense, his eyes alive with intelligence and mischief. "It's not so bad," he once said. "It gives me more time to think." And think he did, with a depth and persistence that astonished those around him. He began developing the mathematical framework that would later form the foundation of his PhD thesis, on the singularities of spacetime. He was seeking proof that, under certain physical conditions, the universe must have begun as a singularity, that creation itself was not an accident, but a necessity of the laws of physics. He found an unexpected ally in another young mathematician, Roger Penrose. Penrose had recently developed a theorem that described how gravitational collapse could lead inevitably to singularities within black holes. Stephen realized that this same logic could be applied in reverse, not to the death of stars, but to the birth of the universe. It was a revelation. Through long nights of calculation and thought, he refined the idea, merging relativity and cosmology in ways no one had before. In 1965, his thesis was complete. A new vision of the cosmos, one in which time and space themselves had a beginning. The boy who once dismantled clocks to understand their workings had now touched the clockwork of the universe itself. And yet, he lived each day under the shadow of his diagnosis. The disease continued its slow progression. Walking became harder. Speaking required effort. But his spirit, his calm, defiant sense of curiosity, seemed only to grow stronger. He often said later that before his illness, he found life rather boring. The diagnosis, paradoxically, gave him focus, a reason to live, a reason to think deeply. When you're faced with the possibility of an early death, he once reflected, you realize that there are many things worth doing. He stopped thinking of time as something he was losing and began to see it as something he could fill. A vessel, limited but luminous. In the quiet halls of Cambridge, amid the ticking of clocks and the hum of evening rain, a new Stephen Hawking was being born, fragile in body, yet boundless in mind. His discoveries were no longer abstract theories. They were reflections of his own existence. Proof that even when the body fails, thought can still move faster than light, reaching places that matter cannot. The universe, he realized, was not cruel. It was indifferent. And within that indifference, meaning could still be created. The stars did not need to care for him to shine. He only needed to look up and understand them. The slow years that followed his PhD were both heavy and luminous. Stephen Hawking's world was shrinking in one sense. His body, now less obedient, required canes, then a wheelchair. Yet in another sense, it was expanding beyond measure. His thoughts reached farther and deeper into the unknown than they ever had before. Cambridge became his universe. The cobblestone courtyards, the echo of footsteps along Trinity Lane, the cool scent of ancient libraries, they were part of the rhythm of his days. Students and colleagues would see him, head slightly tilted, eyes narrowed in contemplation, lost not in the physical world but in the curvature of space-time. He was fascinated by black holes, those mysterious remnants of dying stars, where gravity grew so intense that not even light could escape. They were, to most, regions of eternal darkness. But to Stephen, they were invitations, places where nature whispered secrets in its own language. Black holes had once been thought of as cosmic ends, silent voids where matter vanished forever. Yet Stephen began to wonder if that was truly the whole story. Could something so absolute really exist without consequence? Could the laws of physics, so delicately woven, allow such loss without balance? He thought of entropy, of thermodynamics, of the fundamental rule that in any closed system, disorder must increase. If black holes swallowed information, what happened to that law? Did the universe permit a place where the order of things simply disappeared? The question kept him awake many nights. Jane, now his fiancée, often found him in his study long after midnight. His papers spread like white constellations across the desk. The ticking of a clock would mingle with the quiet rasp of his breathing. Sometimes, when he struggled to speak, he would simply write equations, his thoughts unfolding silently across the page. It was during these years that his health continued its slow decline. Walking became impossible. His speech softer and harder to decipher, but his humor remained intact. When colleagues expressed pity, he would smile and say, "It's not as bad as it looks. I get a better parking spot now." What sustained him most was curiosity. He began to explore an idea so radical, it seemed to defy the nature of black holes themselves. What if they were not entirely black? What if on the smallest scales they emitted something, faint, invisible but real? He built upon quantum mechanics, combining it with the fabric of general relativity. These two great theories of modern physics, so elegant yet so incompatible, had always resisted unification. But Stephen imagined a place where they might meet, at the edge of a black hole, where gravity and quantum energy coexisted in fragile balance. Using intricate mathematics, he showed that black holes could emit radiation. faint particles streaming from their event horizons, caused by quantum fluctuations. This meant that black holes were not eternal. They could slowly evaporate, fading over time until nothing remained but a whisper of energy. The idea was astonishing. It contradicted long-held assumptions and unsettled physicists everywhere. How could something known for swallowing everything also give something back? How could the ultimate symbol of destruction become a slow release of light? But Hawking's equations were precise, his logic unassailable. And the universe, he seemed to say, always balanced its books. The radiation became known as Hawking radiation, and it changed cosmology forever. With this discovery, Stephen had bridged two great pillars of science, quantum mechanics and relativity, if only partially, showing that even in the darkest corners of space the laws of physics still held harmony. His work suggested something profound, that nothing in the universe was ever truly lost. Even black holes, those cosmic prisons, would eventually release their secrets back into the vastness. In this, there was a reflection of Stephen's own condition. His body, collapsing inward under the weight of disease, seemed to mirror the structure of a black hole, bound, finite, decaying. Yet his mind radiated outward, endlessly, spilling light into the darkness. He was, in many ways, the living embodiment of his own discovery. By the mid-1970s, Stephen's fame was spreading. Invitations arrived from universities around the world. He lectured in America, in Europe, his voice still his own though softer, slower. Audiences would fall silent as he spoke, not because of pity, but awe, at the clarity, the humor, the serenity with which he discussed the most complex ideas imaginable. He rarely sought attention, but attention found him. In quiet moments, he remained humble. To him, every discovery was simply another step toward understanding something vaster than himself. He once wrote, "The universe does not owe us understanding. We owe it attention." Jane, now his wife, became his anchor. She cared for him, translated his speech, and ensured he could continue his work despite the increasing challenges. Their home was filled with a curious mix of laughter, exhaustion, and quiet devotion. She described later that there was always a sense of time running fast, not with fear but with purpose. Together they faced the small daily struggles, the wheelchair adjustments, the lab equipment, the letters to colleagues. Yet amid it all, Stephen continued to write, to think, to explore. He joined debates with other physicists, Kip Thorne, Roger Penrose, and John Wheeler, about the nature of black holes and the information paradox. These discussions were not battles but shared voyages into uncertainty. They spoke of entropy, of the fate of particles, of time itself. What fascinated Stephen most was not just how the universe behaved, but why it behaved that way. What was the logic behind its symmetry? What was the origin of its laws? And could those laws ever truly explain consciousness, the human mind that sought to understand them? He often compared human thought to the universe itself, complex, finite in form, but infinite in potential. Late at night, as he worked in silence, Jane would sometimes find him gazing out the window toward the night sky. "It's strange," he once said, "how something so vast can feel so close." That simple observation revealed his essence, his ability to merge the cosmic and the personal, the infinite and the intimate. Physically, his decline accelerated. By 1979, he could no longer write or speak clearly without assistance. Yet his intellect continued to grow stronger. Technology began to intertwine with his existence, devices that allowed him to communicate, machines that supported his movement. He adapted without complaint, focusing only on what could still be done. There was a calm acceptance in him, but never surrender. To those around him, he seemed to live outside the ordinary flow of time. His patience was infinite, his sense of wonder untouched. He approached life as he did physics, not as a tragedy to be endured, but as a puzzle to be understood. As the decade came to an end, Stephen had become one of the most brilliant minds of his generation. His discoveries were not only scientific, but symbolic. Proof that even in limitation, there could be expansion. Even in silence, communication. Even in darkness, light. The man who had once been told he might live only 2 years was now reshaping humanity, his understanding of existence itself. In his world of equations and stars, there was no bitterness, no regret, only curiosity. The same curiosity that once made a boy take apart clocks to learn how time worked, now guided a man who had taught the world that time itself could bend, break, and yet still find beauty in its imperfection. He had not merely survived, he had transcended. And in doing so, he had proven a quiet truth that echoed through his work and his life alike. Even the universe in all its vastness is not measured by its size, but by the depth of its mystery. The 1980s opened like a quiet dawn over Stephen Hawking's life, gentle, yet filled with light. His health had reached a fragile equilibrium. His disease no longer moved swiftly, yet his physical world was now fully defined by the chair that carried him, the machines that supported his breath, and the computer that would soon give voice to his thoughts. But within these boundaries, his mind roamed freer than ever before. By then, his name was known throughout the halls of Cambridge and across the scientific world. His lectures drew not only physicists but philosophers, poets, and artists, anyone who longed to understand where we came from and what might lie beyond. The topics were complex: space-time curvature, the quantum nature of gravity, the geometry of singularities. But what people remembered most was not the equations but the serenity with which he spoke of them. He was a man bound by the limits of flesh, yet his thoughts stretched across galaxies. As his fame grew, so too did his sense of responsibility, to share, to translate, to bridge the immense distance between the ordinary world and the vastness of cosmology. The universe, he once said, belongs to everyone who dares to ask about it. And so, in the mid-1980s, he began writing a book for those who might never study physics, who might never read a single formula, but who still looked up at the night sky and wondered. It began as a modest project, meant to explain the structure and origin of the universe in clear language. Yet as he wrote, it grew into something deeper, a meditation on time itself, and on the human desire to comprehend the infinite. He wrote slowly, dictating with painstaking effort, each word chosen not only for accuracy but for rhythm. His sentences unfolded like calm waves, guiding readers through the Big Bang, black holes, relativity, and quantum mechanics. But beneath the science ran something more profound, a quiet awe, a reverence for the delicate order hidden in the chaos of existence. He titled it, A Brief History of Time. When it was published in 1988, the world paused to listen. The book became an unexpected phenomenon. It appeared on bestseller lists across continents, translated into dozens of languages. People who had never before read about physics now found themselves contemplating the nature of time, the possibility of multiple universes, the enigma of beginnings and endings. Stephen was astonished by the response. He had never sought fame, only understanding. Yet now, in homes and classrooms around the world, his words rested on nightstands and desks, their pages filled with wonder. He had done something few scientists ever achieve. He had made the cosmos feel intimate. Television interviews followed, documentaries, public lectures that filled halls with thousands of listeners. Cameras would focus on his motionless frame, the flicker of his eyes as his computer-generated voice filled the room. The voice, calm, metallic, patient, became iconic. It carried the weight of his thoughts across the world, bridging the gap between man and machine, between silence and speech. He once joked, "They gave me an American accent, but I kept the British timing." It was a small spark of humor that humanized the machinery, that reminded everyone there was a man, brilliant, mischievous, and deeply alive, behind the circuits and screens. Through it all, he remained rooted in the simple wonder that had guided him since childhood. He spoke not as a prophet or a sage, but as a fellow traveler, gazing into the same mysterious sky. In interviews, when asked about God or the purpose of creation, he would answer softly, "I think the universe doesn't need a creator. It is governed by laws, and the beauty of those laws is that they can explain themselves. Yet his tone was never combative. There was humility in his reasoning, an acknowledgement that knowledge was not the end of mystery, but its continuation. His fame, however, came with complexities. Jane, his wife, struggled with the growing demands of his care and the attention surrounding him. Their home, once a private sanctuary, became a place of constant movement. Assistants, nurses, journalists, visitors. She remained steadfast in her devotion, but exhaustion crept into their days like a quiet shadow. For Stephen, too, fame brought a new kind of solitude. He was surrounded by people, yet often isolated within the stillness of his condition. Conversations required patience. Travel demanded careful planning. Yet he found solace in thought, in the silent vastness of mathematics and theory. He once said, "My goal is simple. It is complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is and why it exists at all." The words were simple, but they contained an entire philosophy. A peaceful acceptance that to seek was enough, even if one never arrived. In this period, his public image grew to mythic proportions. To many, he was no longer just a scientist, but a symbol of human endurance. A man who had lost almost everything except his will to think, and through that will, had touched eternity. Children wrote him letters, asking about stars. Students sent him their dreams of discovery. Artists painted his likeness surrounded by galaxies, and everywhere people spoke of him not just as a physicist, but as a reminder that even within limits, there could be infinite possibility. Yet for Stephen, life remained quietly ordinary. He enjoyed television comedies, classical music, and good company. He delighted in irony, in practical jokes. He still laughed when his wheelchair malfunctioned during lectures, turning unexpectedly, and he would quip, "A black hole has entered the room." His curiosity never rested. Even after a brief history of time, he continued to explore, proposing new theories about the origins of the universe, the possibility of multiple dimensions, and the strange behavior of information in black holes. He ventured further into quantum gravity, seeking what physicists called the theory of everything, a framework that could unite all forces and laws of nature into one coherent vision. To many, such a goal seemed unreachable. To him, it was simply a continuation of wonder. His life during these years became an intricate balance between public and private, between intellect and emotion. His children, now growing older, became another source of pride and grounding. Though his voice came through a computer, his warmth came through effortlessly, in smiles, in humor, in the brightness of his eyes. As the decade waned, Stephen had not only rewritten scientific boundaries, but had also redefined the human spirit. The disease that was meant to silence him had instead amplified his voice across the globe. In the stillness of his study late at night, when the house was quiet and the hum of his chair was the only sound, he would often gaze at the stars beyond the window. He could no longer move toward them, but his thoughts could travel anywhere. And in those moments, he would reflect on the strange, beautiful symmetry of it all, that a body trapped by gravity could give birth to ideas that defied it. He had spent a lifetime studying black holes, yet he himself had become something similar, a singular point from which light continued to escape, illuminating everything around him. For him, the search was never about glory or certainty. It was about participation, about being a conscious part of the universe that asked questions of itself. And so, as his fame reached its height, Stephen Hawking remained what he had always been, a quiet explorer of time, moving through stillness, carrying the universe in his mind. "Remember to look up at the stars," he would later tell audiences, "and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious." It was both advice and confession, the distilled essence of a man who had spent his life doing exactly that. The success of A Brief History of Time carried Stephen Hawking into a realm few scientists had ever entered. It was not only that he had become famous, it was that his ideas had reached the hearts of people far removed from physics. His voice, mechanical yet gentle, began to echo across television screens, lecture halls, and documentaries. To the public, he was no longer merely a theoretical physicist. He was a symbol of human perseverance, of mind triumphing over matter. But behind this growing legend, Stephen's days remained quietly human. His mornings began not with grand thoughts of cosmology, but with the slow, deliberate process of preparation, the careful adjustment of his wheelchair, the assistance of caregivers, the routine that allowed his body to function within its limits. Each motion required patience, each task collaboration. Yet through these simple beginnings, his mind was already soaring elsewhere, through galaxies, across the event horizons of black holes, through the earliest seconds of the universe. He once wrote that his body was like a machine of flesh that had stopped working properly, but his mind, paradoxically, had become freer. Although I cannot move, he reflected, I can still travel the universe in my imagination. And indeed, he did. Through the 1990s, Stephen continued his research with remarkable vigor. His fascination with black holes deepened into one of the most profound scientific debates of the century, the black hole information paradox. It was a question that reached to the very foundations of reality. If black holes evaporated through Hawking radiation, as he had shown, then what happened to the information contained within them? Quantum mechanics insisted that information could never truly be destroyed, but relativity, under his own equations, seemed to suggest that it could vanish beyond the event horizon. This contradiction troubled him deeply. For years he wrestled with it, proposing and testing possibilities, each more intricate than the last. It was not just a theoretical concern. It touched something deeper, a question of permanence and loss. Could knowledge, memory, existence itself simply disappear? Or did the universe, in its wisdom, always preserve some echo of what had been? In these questions one could feel Stephen's own reflections on mortality. His life had long since become a meditation on impermanence, the gradual loss of movement, of speech, of physical independence. Yet he continued to find beauty in what endured. Thought, curiosity, love, the silent dialogue between the human mind and the cosmos. As he worked, technology became an extension of his being. His wheelchair was equipped with advanced systems, and his communication device allowed him to write, speak, and think aloud in digital rhythm. Each word was selected through slight movements of his cheek, a muscle that still obeyed him, delicate and precise. With it, he constructed ideas vast enough to fill the universe. He often spoke of the importance of humor in keeping perspective. Life would be tragic, he once quipped, if it weren't funny. His laughter, dry, quick, and intelligent, filled the spaces between his lectures. It reminded everyone that behind the computer voice was a man who still loved irony, who still enjoyed the absurdities of existence. In public, he appeared serene, but fame came with invisible weight. The attention, the constant travel, the demands of interviews and events, they became exhausting, both for him and for those close to him. Jane, who had shared his life since the beginning, bore that weight silently. She continued to care for him, but the years of effort, of sleepless nights and emotional strain had taken their toll. Their marriage, once filled with shared purpose, began to drift into quiet distance. They still respected and cared for each other, but the rhythm of their lives had changed. Stephen's growing team of assistants and his increasing dependence on others created a new dynamic, one that slowly, gently, altered the shape of their intimacy. Amid these private struggles, Stephen continued to shine publicly. His lectures became global events. People lined up for hours to hear him speak. When his synthesized voice filled an auditorium, the silence was total. Every word seemed to carry weight, not because it was dramatic, but because it was deliberate. Each phrase a small victory of patience and will. He spoke of the birth of the universe, of the eventual heat-death of all matter, of the possibility of parallel worlds. But often, he ended with something simple, something human. However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. Those words were as scientific as they were spiritual. They resonated not as advice from a distant genius, but as truth from someone who had learned to live within limitation, yet never within despair. The late nights in Cambridge remained much the same as they had in his student years. Papers covered his desk, quiet music played in the background, and the glow of a screen illuminated his face. His assistants, often students themselves, learned not only physics from him, but perspective. How to think deeply and calmly, how to question without fear. Outside, the world was changing. Technology accelerated, the Cold War ended, and humanity began to dream once more of exploring the stars. Stephen watched these shifts with quiet optimism. He believed that intelligence, both human and artificial, would shape the next stage of our existence. "The greatest enemy of knowledge," he said once, "is not ignorance but the illusion of knowledge." He remained a scientist of paradoxes, a realist who dreamed, a skeptic who still spoke of wonder. By the late 1990s, his health had become increasingly fragile. He was hospitalized several times, surviving conditions that might have claimed others. Yet each time he returned to work as if the universe itself had granted him an extension to continue his questions. It was during one such recovery period that he met Elaine Mason, one of his nurses. Their companionship grew into affection, and eventually they married. The public viewed the change with mixed emotions. Some misunderstood, others supportive. But for Stephen, it was another affirmation of life's persistence. He had always refused to live as if he were dying. He lived as if time itself were infinite within the moment. His second marriage brought both companionship and complexity. It also deepened his awareness of dependence on technology, on others, on care. He approached these realities with the same calm curiosity that guided his science. Every challenge was another parameter in the equation of living. Through these shifting years, his relationship with the world evolved. He became not just a scientist, but a voice of reflection. He spoke about the environment, about the future of artificial intelligence, about humanity's need to look beyond Earth. His gaze, as always, was directed outward, toward the stars, toward possibility. He often described himself as an optimist, not because he believed the universe was kind, but because he believed consciousness itself was a miracle. "We are just an advanced breed of monkeys," he once said with a glint of humor, "on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe. That makes us something very special." There was a quiet reverence in that humility, a peace born from accepting both insignificance and greatness in the same breath. Late at night, when lectures were over and the house fell into stillness, Stephen would sometimes be left alone with his thoughts. The mechanical hum of his chair and the faint beeping of medical equipment became part of the silence. He would look through the window and see the same stars that had once fascinated him as a boy, still burning, still endless. For a moment he was neither famous nor frail. He was simply a mind in communion with the cosmos, a quiet observer of infinity. In those moments, the boundaries between his discoveries and his being seemed to dissolve. The laws he studied were not abstractions, but reflections of something intimate, that time, fragile as it is, can still hold meaning, that even in decay there can be creation, that light, though faint, always finds a way through darkness. He had spent his life exploring black holes, but what he had truly uncovered was the radiance that exists within them, a metaphor for his own journey, a testament to the resilience of consciousness. And so, as fame surrounded him, as his body continued its slow surrender, Stephen Hawking remained unchanged at his core, a quiet explorer in an infinite sea, tracing the patterns of light against the darkness of existence. The stars did not answer his questions, but they listened. By the late 1990s and into the first years of the new millennium, Stephen Hawking had become a fixture of global consciousness, a scientist, a philosopher, a poet of the cosmos whose voice spoke not just equations, but the human experience of seeking truth. Yet despite the public's fascination with him, the rhythm of his inner life remained much the same, slow, deliberate, and filled with contemplation. Cambridge continued to be his sanctuary. The cobbled streets, the whisper of bicycle wheels, the sound of wind through ancient courtyards. They all seemed to hold a timeless quality. For Stephen, those sounds were part of his internal landscape. He moved through the college like a ghost of reason, surrounded by the weight of centuries of thought. Inside his office, papers still formed small mountains on his desk. The whiteboard, full of half-erased formulas, captured the restless beauty of his mind, patterns that spoke of universes yet to be imagined. There was no rush to solve them. For him, discovery was a form of meditation, a slow unfolding of insight. It was in these quiet hours that his philosophy began to deepen beyond physics. He started to see science not only as a way to understand the universe, but as a mirror to human existence. The more he studied time and space, the more he felt that every law of the cosmos reflected something about life itself. He often spoke of entropy, the gradual drift from order to disorder. To most, it was a law of thermodynamics. To Stephen, it was also a truth of being. Everything changes, everything decays, yet in that decay lies the very essence of transformation. Without imperfection, he wrote, neither you nor I would exist. In those words was a profound acceptance of his illness, of mortality, of the universe's strange balance between chaos and creation. His work on the black hole information paradox entered a new stage. For decades it had remained an unresolved question, one that divided physicists and philosophers alike. But as his understanding matured, he began to see beyond the apparent contradiction. He proposed that information might not vanish at all, but could be preserved on the event horizon itself, encoded in a subtle shimmer of radiation. In time, this insight would lead him to concede that information, in fact, could escape a black hole, a humble reversal of his own earlier conclusion. To him, that change was not defeat. It was a revelation, a sign that knowledge, like the universe, was alive and capable of evolving. The paradox had not only challenged physics, it had mirrored his own existence. For years he had defied expectations, continuing to create, to teach, to live fully, even as his body seemed to close in around him. If black holes could radiate, if information could survive annihilation, then perhaps consciousness too could transcend boundaries once thought final. These were not religious musings. Stephen was clear that his philosophy remained scientific. Yet, there was an unmistakable spirituality in the way he spoke of understanding. He described the universe as a grand design, not in the sense of divine intervention, but as a testament to the subtle coherence of laws that give rise to beauty. Because there is a law such as gravity, he wrote, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Some took these words as denial of a higher power. Others saw in them a deeper reverence, the recognition that creation itself, spontaneous and self-sustaining, was the ultimate miracle. For Stephen, the wonder of existence needed no external author. It was enough that it was. He became increasingly fascinated by the concept of time itself, not as a mere dimension, but as the rhythm of existence. His early work with imaginary time, an abstract mathematical concept, had led him to envision a universe without boundaries, where time curved back on itself, eliminating the need for a beginning or an end. Such an idea was more than theoretical. It was poetic. It suggested that the universe was eternal not in duration, but in wholeness, a self-contained totality where every moment, every particle, every thought was part of the same endless cycle. He once said, "The past, present, and future are illusions, even if stubborn ones." That statement revealed a quiet serenity in his understanding. If time was not linear, then perhaps loss was never absolute. Perhaps everything that ever existed still existed, woven into the fabric of reality. His lectures, though filled with equations and logic, began to sound almost like meditations. He spoke of the universe's beginning not as a singular explosion, but as a moment of infinite density, a quiet seed of everything that would ever be. He described space as a living fabric, rippling gently under the weight of gravity. He described black holes as silent engines of transformation. Listening to him, audiences felt a rare calm. He did not try to dazzle them with spectacle. He invited them into stillness, into a kind of cosmic contemplation. His fame brought him into contact with artists, musicians, and thinkers. He appeared in television shows and films, always with a sense of humor about himself. Yet what he truly enjoyed were conversations about meaning, about what it meant to exist in a universe that seemed both vast and intimate. In those discussions, he would sometimes pause, not because of difficulty speaking, but because he was listening inwardly, searching for words that could bridge science and soul. His assistants described moments when, after long hours of work, he would simply stare out the window of his office. No one disturbed him. They knew he was thinking, or perhaps not thinking at all, simply being. The evening light would fade across the stone walls, and in that slow dimming there was a reflection of time itself, the very thing he had spent a lifetime studying. The world began to recognize that his contribution was not only scientific but humanistic. He had taught people to face limitation without fear, to seek understanding rather than control, to find beauty in knowledge itself. He once remarked, "It surprises me how disinterested we are today about things like physics, space, the universe, and philosophy of our existence, our purpose, our final destiny. It's a crazy world out there. Be curious." Curiosity. That was his true legacy. It was the force that moved him, that kept his mind awake long after his body had surrendered. In these years, his books became more philosophical, more universal in tone. The universe in a nutshell, the grand design. They were not just for physicists, but for anyone seeking to understand the quiet miracle of being alive. He never lost his sense of wonder. Even as technology advanced around him, as his voice synthesis improved, as his team grew larger, he remained a student of simplicity. "My goal," he once said, "is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all." There was a humility in that simplicity, a recognition that to understand even a fraction of the cosmos was already an act of profound grace. At times, his work carried him into debates with other great minds about the nature of the universe, the possibility of multiverses, the fine-tuning of cosmic constants. But Stephen's approach remained calm and balanced. He treated disagreement as a necessary beauty of science, the friction that gives birth to light. He spoke often of the future of humanity. He warned of climate change, artificial intelligence, and the fragility of our world. Yet his warnings were never despairing. They were invitations to awareness. "Remember to look up at the stars," he would say, "and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see, and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious." Those words became a mantra for many, a soft whisper reminding us that even in an age of machines and noise, wonder remains our most human quality. In his later lectures, the line between science and poetry nearly vanished. He spoke of the universe as a grand symphony, where every particle plays its part. He saw equations not as restrictions, but as music, patterns of meaning that, when listened to deeply, reveal harmony. He had once said that his dream was to know the mind of God. In time, he clarified that what he sought was not a divine personality, but the ultimate unity, the single elegant law that binds all things. Whether that law was written in numbers or silence no longer mattered. The search itself was enough. As the new millennium unfolded, his thoughts turned increasingly toward legacy, not the kind measured in fame or books, but in the continuation of curiosity. He hoped that his life might remind others that limitations can become doorways, and that knowledge pursued with humility is an act of love. And in the quiet of his study, surrounded by the hum of his machines and the glow of distant stars, he continued to think, slowly, endlessly, about time, not as something to master, but as something to understand. Time, he knew, was not an enemy. It was the gentle current that carried all things forward, and in its flow, even the smallest thought, the briefest spark of curiosity, could ripple across eternity. For Stephen Hawking, The laws of the universe were not cold or distant. They were the soft breath of existence itself, the language of being whispered across the fabric of space and time. The early years of the 21st century brought Stephen Hawking a quiet, enduring presence in the world, a presence that combined celebrity, scholarship, and profound humanity. He was now a figure whose ideas transcended the lecture hall, a man whose voice, synthesized yet warm, resonated with millions seeking understanding in a vast, mysterious universe. Yet in private, his life remained a delicate balance of discovery, reflection, and the slow rhythm imposed by his body. Cambridge continued to be the anchor of his existence. The ancient buildings, the echo of footsteps on stone floors, and the soft rustle of papers in his office formed the backdrop to days filled with both rigorous thought and contemplative stillness. He spent hours in dialogue with students, colleagues, and assistants, guiding, questioning, and exploring ideas in the calm cadence of a mind unbounded by the limitations of the flesh. His work had shifted subtly. While he continued to delve into black holes, quantum mechanics, and the origins of the universe, he increasingly considered the broader philosophical implications of his research. How does the understanding of cosmic law influence human life? How does the knowledge of creation and decay affect the way we live? These questions were as pressing to him as any mathematical problem. In public, Stephen's recognition had grown to a near mythic scale. Television programs, documentaries, awards, and invitations from around the globe reminded him of the extraordinary reach of his influence, yet he approached these honors with his familiar humility. Fame was not the purpose of his life. Understanding was. He once said, "I've never considered myself an especially interesting person. I'm just an ordinary human being trying to make sense of the universe." Still, recognition brought challenges. The constant attention could be exhausting. Each public appearance required careful planning. Each lecture demanded energy that sometimes his body struggled to provide. Jane, and later his assistants, became indispensable guides through this demanding landscape, helping him navigate not only physical barriers but also the demands of public life. He learned quietly to accept the paradoxes of his own existence. The body that failed him imposed boundaries, yet it was within these very limitations that his creativity and insight seemed to flourish. The illness that might have ended a life instead seemed to concentrate it, focusing his mind like a lens on the infinite expanse of space and time. His lectures during this period often took on a reflective, almost meditative quality. Audiences were led through the birth of the universe, the evolution of stars, and the mysteries of black holes, but always with a gentle reminder of the human perspective, of wonder, humility, and curiosity. He emphasized that while scientific knowledge illuminates the cosmos, it is the act of inquiry itself that brings meaning to life. In quieter moments, he spoke of mortality and the passage of time with a serene acceptance that few could attain. "Life would be tragic," he said softly, "if it weren't so beautiful. Time is fleeting, yet within it, everything matters." These reflections often intertwined with his scientific insights. The universe, after all, followed laws of balance and transformation. Nothing was permanent, yet nothing was without consequence. Black holes, which devoured matter, also radiated information. Stars burned brightly only to collapse and give birth to new forms. And human life, fragile as it is, participates in the same cycles of creation and transformation. Stephen's philosophical musings extended beyond physics. He pondered the trajectory of humanity, the ethical use of technology, and the responsibility of knowledge. He spoke with a calm urgency about artificial intelligence, climate change, and the stewardship of Earth, not as threats to despair over, but as challenges to approach with intellect, care, and foresight. Even as he engaged with the world on these profound matters, he cherished the quiet, ordinary joys of life. Music, literature, conversation, and observation of the natural world remained sources of pleasure and inspiration. He delighted in humor, often making subtle jokes that highlighted both human folly and resilience. Amid these reflections, his personal relationships continued to shape him. His family, colleagues, and students provided a network of connection that supported both his work and his spirit. Though his fame set him apart, these bonds grounded him, reminding him that even the most extraordinary minds thrive in dialogue, care, and shared humanity. His health, however, continued its slow progression. The physical limitations imposed by ALS demanded constant adaptation. Technology became both a tool and a companion. The speech synthesizer, specialized computer interfaces, and mobility aids allowed him to maintain independence and continue contributing to science in ways that would have been impossible decades earlier. Stephen approached these tools with the same curiosity that he brought to black holes and the origins of time. They were extensions of his mind, enabling it to move freely where his body could not. In a way, they embodied a principle he had long observed in the universe. Constraint and innovation exist in tandem. Limitation can lead to extraordinary creativity. Despite the public spotlight, he cultivated a life of quiet reflection. He spent hours thinking deeply about questions that had no immediate answers: the meaning of existence, the nature of consciousness, and the ultimate fate of the universe. He continued to write, to lecture, and to explore theoretical frontiers with meticulous care and relentless curiosity. In these years, Stephen Hawking became both a teacher and a symbol, a reminder of what it means to live fully within limitations, to engage deeply with the world, and to pursue knowledge with patience, humility, and awe. He had long ago recognized that the universe does not yield its secrets easily, and yet through persistence, insight, and the gentle insistence of curiosity, he had revealed truths that had once seemed inaccessible. His life, like the cosmos he studied, was marked by paradox, fragility and strength, limitation and expansion, silence and radiance. It was a testament to the quiet laws of existence, to the profound possibilities that arise when one observes, reflects, and seeks understanding with calm perseverance. Even in the midst of public attention, amidst the challenges of his body, Stephen Hawking maintained an inner rhythm, a meditative awareness that balanced inquiry, reflection, and acceptance. And in doing so, he created not only groundbreaking science, but also a model of a life lived with purpose, curiosity, and profound humanity. The stars outside his window, unchanged over millennia, mirrored the constancy of his pursuit. Each equation, each lecture, each reflection was a ripple in that timeless cosmos, small yet resonant, fleeting yet meaningful. Stephen's journey in these years was not defined by urgency, but by depth, not by triumph alone, but by the patient unfolding of insight, the calm resilience of intellect, and the quiet illumination of wonder. And so even as his body grew ever more fragile, his mind remained luminous, a beacon not only for science, but for the human spirit, proving that within the vast expanse of the universe, a single consciousness can leave ripples that endure beyond the measure of time. As the new century progressed, Stephen Hawking's life became a delicate interplay between physical limitation and boundless mental exploration. The ALS that had accompanied him for decades continued its slow advance, gradually rendering him ever more dependent on the assistance of others and on the technology that translated his thoughts into voice. Yet these constraints, rather than diminishing him, seemed to focus the intensity of his intellect and the expansiveness of his imagination. His daily routine was measured and precise. Mornings began with adjustments of the wheelchair and medical equipment, ensuring that every system functioned smoothly. But beyond the mechanical necessities, the world within his mind stretched freely into realms unreachable by the body. He explored the curvature of space-time, the behavior of quantum fields, the enigmatic geometry of black holes, and the hypothetical landscapes of multiple universes. For Stephen, these were not mere problems to be solved, but meditative landscapes to inhabit, quietly and deliberately. During this period, he continued to advance the questions that had occupied him for years, particularly the black hole information paradox. While he had once proposed that information might be lost as black holes evaporated, he now refined his position, suggesting instead that information could be preserved at the event horizon in subtle, intricate patterns. This evolving understanding exemplified a deeper philosophical principle he had always embraced, that knowledge is not fixed, but grows, and that change is an intrinsic aspect of understanding. Despite the complexity of his work, Stephen remained aware of the human dimension of science. He often spoke about curiosity as a fundamental human trait, one that defined not only the pursuit of physics, but the very experience of being alive. In lectures, he encouraged students and audiences alike to consider questions of existence not as abstract puzzles, but as intimate invitations to reflect on life itself. He observed that the universe, with its immense scales and intricate laws, mirrors the human condition in subtle ways. Just as stars emerge, burn, and collapse, human lives unfold through cycles of growth, struggle, and transformation. As entropy governs the cosmos, so too does time shape human experience, not as an adversary, but as a current that carries both wonder and loss. Physically, Stephen's decline was undeniable. Fine motor control became nearly impossible. His ability to communicate relied entirely on advanced computerized systems, and each sentence required meticulous effort. Yet his mind remained agile, and in these years the clarity and depth of his reasoning seemed even sharper than before. He could follow and construct arguments with precision, identify inconsistencies in theoretical models, and imagine possibilities that others could scarcely conceive. Technology for him was not simply a tool, but a bridge. The computerized voice that had become emblematic of his persona was in essence a conduit for consciousness, a reminder that the essence of a person lies not solely in the body, but in the capacity to think, reflect, and create. During quieter evenings, he found solace in observation and contemplation, looking out over the darkened courtyards of Cambridge or the night sky beyond. He often mused on the vastness of space and the fleeting nature of human life. These moments were meditative, almost ritualistic. The ticking of clocks, the faint hum of equipment, and the soft rustle of papers became companions in his reflective hours. Even amid increasing physical dependence, Stephen maintained a sense of humor and perspective. His wit was gentle but incisive, a reminder that intellect and levity could coexist. He enjoyed playful interactions with colleagues, students, and the wider public, often using humor to highlight the absurdities and ironies inherent in human endeavor. As he aged, Stephen also contemplated the broader trajectory of humanity. He warned of potential risks: climate change, nuclear proliferation, and the unchecked growth of artificial intelligence. Yet he approached these challenges with reasoned optimism. He emphasized foresight, curiosity, and ethical responsibility, reminding audiences that intelligence carries both privilege and duty. His reflections during this time extended into questions of meaning and existence. While he remained steadfastly scientific, he acknowledged the wonder that accompanies inquiry. The universe, in its vastness and complexity, is not only a subject of study, but a source of aesthetic and philosophical insight. Time, space, and the laws of nature could be understood through mathematics, yet they also evoked a profound sense of humility and reverence. Stephen's life had become a study in contrasts: limitation and freedom, silence and voice, human fragility and cosmic magnitude. He embodied the paradoxes he explored. A man whose body was bound but whose intellect traveled across galaxies, whose illness constrained him, yet illuminated him in ways ordinary existence rarely allowed. He continued to publish, lecture, and inspire. His books and articles, though often dense in content, remained accessible in tone, imbued with clarity, humility, and a sense of gentle guidance. He sought to communicate not only results but processes, encouraging readers and listeners to engage actively with the unfolding mysteries of the universe. Through the early 2000s, Stephen's reputation became increasingly global, and his ideas reached beyond academic circles into the public imagination. He was invited to speak at conferences, collaborate on media projects, and advise on scientific policy. Yet in every interaction, he remained true to his own rhythm, deliberate, reflective, and patient. Fame never distracted him from his central purpose: the quiet pursuit of understanding. In these years, his philosophical reflections deepened. He often spoke of life's impermanence, urging attention to the present and the cultivation of curiosity. Knowledge, he believed, was inseparable from wonder, To explore the universe was to engage in a dialogue with existence itself, a conversation in which questions mattered as much as answers. Even as technology advanced around him, Stephen maintained his humanistic perspective. The computer-generated voice, the mobility devices, and the sophisticated software that facilitated his work were extensions of his mind, but they were also reminders that human creativity and adaptability can flourish even within constraints. His life became a testament to the principle that ingenuity and resilience are inseparable from the pursuit of understanding. Through decades of study, reflection, and quiet endurance, Stephen Hawking reached a stage of serene wisdom. He had seen the limits of the body, the persistence of the mind, and the vast, intricate order of the universe. He had lived through challenges that would have broken many, yet he persisted, contributing profoundly to human knowledge while exemplifying the dignity and grace of a life fully examined. In these years, Stephen's presence, though physically constrained, radiated outward through his work, his students, his writings, and his public engagements. He had become a living bridge between the vastness of the cosmos and the intimate human experience, a reminder that curiosity, patience, and reflection can illuminate even the darkest corners of existence. His journey illustrated a truth both scientific and philosophical, that limitation need not diminish purpose, that fragility can coexist with brilliance, and that a life devoted to inquiry, humility, and wonder can leave an enduring light upon the world. And so, as the quiet hum of his machines accompanied the rhythm of his days, Stephen Hawking continued to explore, not only the fabric of the universe but the deeper harmonies of life, time, and consciousness itself. In his stillness there was motion. In his silence there was expression. In his limitations there was boundless reach. Even as the body waned, the mind, ever radiant, traced the infinite, leaving ripples of insight and wisdom that would endure far beyond the measure of years. As the 2010s unfolded, Stephen Hawking moved with a quiet dignity through the final chapters of his extraordinary life. His fame had become inseparable from his identity, yet he approached the attention with calm equanimity. Each interview, lecture, and public appearance was carried out with the same meticulous preparation and reflective pace that had defined his entire existence. His computer-generated voice, steady and deliberate, continued to bridge the gap between body and thought, carrying the weight of ideas that spanned time and space. Despite the challenges of aging and illness, Stephen's intellectual curiosity remained undiminished. His days were filled with writing, collaborative discussions, and the careful construction of new theories. He was deeply engaged with questions at the frontiers of cosmology, the nature of black holes, the possibility of multiple universes, and the subtle interplay between quantum mechanics and gravity. Every problem was approached with patient, deliberate attention, as if he were listening not just to mathematics but to the universe itself. His philosophical reflections deepened alongside his scientific work. He often spoke about the nature of time, the impermanence of life, and the importance of curiosity. To him, human existence was fragile, yet profound, fleeting, yet capable of touching the infinite. He encouraged people to embrace wonder, to seek understanding, and to cherish the act of asking questions as much as the answers themselves. Even as he contended with the physical limitations of ALS, Stephen found ways to engage with the world on his own terms. He participated in documentaries, advised scientific institutions, and inspired students, researchers, and lay people alike. His presence was a reminder that the mind can reach far beyond the constraints of the body, that thought itself can traverse vast landscapes even when motion is impossible. Throughout this period, his personal life was marked by reflection and connection. Relationships with his family, colleagues, and caregivers provided support, grounding, and companionship. He continued to appreciate the simple joys of life, music, literature, humor, and conversation, savoring each experience with a heightened awareness of its fleeting nature. Stephen's writings during these years combined scientific rigor with philosophical depth. The grand design and subsequent works explored the origin and structure of the universe, the role of physical laws, and the tantalizing possibilities of multiverse theories. He sought to convey complex ideas with clarity and elegance, ensuring that even those far from the scientific community could access and contemplate them. He often reflected on the interplay between science and humanity. Knowledge, he observed, was not only a tool for understanding the cosmos but a means of connecting people with the larger rhythms of existence. Curiosity, he suggested, was the most human of traits, a bridge between the individual and the infinite, the finite, and the eternal. Even in the twilight of his life, Stephen remained engaged with pressing global concerns. He spoke about climate change, the ethical use of technology, and the responsibility of humans to act with foresight. His warnings were measured, grounded in reason, but carried the urgency of someone who had observed both the fragility and resilience of life. In quieter moments, he would often gaze at the stars beyond the windows of Cambridge, contemplating the vastness of the cosmos and the fleeting, luminous moments of human existence within it. He understood that life, like the universe itself, follows patterns of emergence and decay, of growth and transformation. In that understanding, he found serenity, purpose, and a profound sense of belonging. Stephen's later public engagements often conveyed this serenity. In interviews, he spoke with gentle humor about his limitations, with calm authority about science, and with subtle poetry about the meaning of life. His presence inspired not only admiration for his intellect, but a deeper reflection on resilience, curiosity, and the pursuit of understanding. His work on black holes continued to evolve. He refined theories about information preservation, the structure of singularities, and the quantum mechanics of gravitational systems. Each contribution, while deeply technical, also reflected his philosophical insight that even the most complex laws of the universe mirror fundamental truths about impermanence, causality, and the persistence of knowledge. Stephen's reflections on mortality were calm and insightful. He recognized the impermanence of his body, but celebrated the endurance of thought, the continuity of ideas, and the capacity of consciousness to leave an imprint upon the world. He often mused that death is a natural part of life, yet the act of inquiry, the ripple of insight, and the spark of curiosity endure far beyond it. He continued to advise, write, and collaborate, not out of obligation but from a genuine desire to explore and share. Students and colleagues often remarked on his patience, clarity, and generosity of thought. Even those unfamiliar with physics found themselves drawn to his reflections on time, existence, and the human role in the cosmos. In the last decade of his life, Stephen Hawking's public persona and private self were intertwined in a balance of calm reflection and persistent inquiry. He demonstrated that intellectual achievement, philosophical insight, and human warmth need not be compromised by physical limitation. His life was a testament to the power of the mind, the importance of curiosity, and the quiet endurance of wisdom. Even as the years advanced, he remained captivated by questions that had inspired him since youth. The origin of the universe, the nature of time, the fate of black holes, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. These questions, pursued with patience and humility, defined the rhythm of his days. As he aged, he found peace in the continuity of knowledge, the idea that even as individual lives end, the pursuit of understanding carries forward, connecting generations across time. He often emphasized that curiosity is a gift, a force that transcends limitation and allows humanity to engage with the infinite. Stephen's later years were marked by public admiration, private reflection, and the ongoing creation of knowledge. He became a symbol not only of scientific genius, but of human resilience, a reminder that intellect and imagination can flourish even within profound physical constraints. His philosophy was simple yet profound: to live fully, to explore, to question, and to appreciate the beauty inherent in existence. The universe, he suggested, is not only to be understood but to be experienced, with awe, patience, and gentle wonder. In the calm of his study, surrounded by the quiet rhythm of machines and the glow of distant stars, Stephen Hawking's life embodied the harmony of intellect and reflection, curiosity and acceptance. His legacy was not only in equations, theories, and books, but in the enduring inspiration he offered to all who dared to look beyond themselves, to ponder the vastness of existence, and to seek understanding with humility and wonder. And in this way, even as time moved inexorably forward, Stephen Hawking became a living echo of the cosmos itself, a reminder that thought, curiosity, and the quiet pursuit of knowledge can shine with a brilliance that endures far beyond the span of a single life. The final years of Stephen Hawking's life unfolded with a quiet dignity, a rhythm defined by stillness, contemplation, and the enduring engagement of a mind that had never ceased to wander through the universe. The disease that had accompanied him for decades continued its slow progression, yet it never curtailed the breadth of his curiosity, nor the serenity with which he approached existence. In these years, life became a careful balance between dependence and freedom, the freedom of thought, the dependence of body. Cambridge remained his sanctuary. Its ancient courtyards, the whispering wind through stone archways, and the muted hum of late-night traffic beyond the college walls provided a calm backdrop to the complex interplay of mind and machine that had become his life. His wheelchair and computer system, once novel tools, were now extensions of his being, seamlessly translating intention into communication. Through them, he spoke with the same clarity and warmth that had long defined his presence in the world. Despite physical constraints, Stephen continued to write, lecture, and advise. His books during this period explored profound questions about the cosmos, the origins of the universe, the ultimate fate of matter and energy, and the enigmatic dance of black holes. Yet these works were not merely scientific. They were meditative reflections, imbued with a philosophy born from years of observing both the universe and the human condition. He often mused on the fleeting nature of existence. Time, he reflected, is both relentless and gentle. It moves inexorably forward, yet within it, moments of beauty, insight, and connection endure. He likened the universe to a vast tapestry, each thread representing a thought, a discovery, or an act of curiosity. Though individual lives may fade, the threads interweave, creating patterns that persist beyond the measure of years. Public recognition continued to accompany him, yet Stephen approached it with the same calm equanimity that had guided his entire life. Honors, interviews, and accolades were accepted quietly, without ostentation. Fame, he understood, was transient. The real legacy lay in ideas shared, questions posed, and the spark of curiosity ignited in others. In quieter moments, he reflected on mortality with a profound acceptance. He recognized the impermanence of his body, yet he celebrated the endurance of thought. "We are just an advanced breed of monkeys," he once said with gentle humor, "on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe. That makes us something very special." In this observation there was both humility and awe, a recognition of human fragility and capability intertwined. Family, friends, and colleagues continued to provide support and companionship. His children and former spouse, Jane, remained important presences in his life, as did caregivers who assisted with the practical necessities of each day. These relationships, quiet and steadfast, grounded him and offered solace amidst the demands of both fame and illness. Even in his final years, Stephen's humor remained intact. He would delight in small ironies, make subtle jokes during interviews, and maintain a twinkle in his eyes that conveyed both intelligence and mischief. Humor, he believed, was essential to understanding life, a counterbalance to its inevitable seriousness, a reminder that even in limitation, joy can exist. His mind, unrestrained by the body, continued to explore the universe's most profound mysteries. He pondered the nature of time, the behavior of black holes, the possibilities of parallel universes, and the fundamental laws that govern existence. These reflections were accompanied by philosophical insights, a meditation on the meaning of knowledge, the continuity of curiosity, and the quiet harmony of life itself. Stephen often emphasized the importance of wonder. "Look up at the stars and not down at your feet," he would advise. "Try to make sense of what you see, and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious." These words, simple yet profound, reflected a lifetime devoted not only to discovery, but to fostering the same sense of awe in others that had carried him through decades of study, illness, and reflection. In Cambridge, in the quiet glow of evening light, surrounded by the faint hum of machinery and the subtle sounds of daily life, Stephen Hawking embodied the convergence of intellect and humanity. His presence demonstrated that even as the body succumbs to limitation, the mind can remain expansive, creative, and serene. He showed that curiosity, patience, and reflection can illuminate the world far more than fame or recognition ever could. The rhythm of his final years was measured not in events or accomplishments, but in thought, reflection, and the quiet cultivation of understanding. Time, which he had studied with such depth, became both companion and teacher. Each day was an opportunity to observe, to ponder, and to share insight, a practice of presence as much as of intellect. He continued to inspire generations of scientists, students, and admirers. His lectures, books, and interviews became touchstones for those seeking both knowledge and perspective. He reminded the world that science is not merely a collection of facts, but a way of engaging with existence, a disciplined curiosity that connects human life with the vastness of the cosmos. In the midst of global recognition, Stephen remained fundamentally himself, a thinker, a seeker, a human being deeply attuned to the subtleties of life, time, and the universe. The tools that enabled him to communicate, the achievements that marked his career, and the attention of the world were secondary to the enduring rhythm of inquiry and reflection that defined each day. Even as his health declined, he persisted in thought, in exploration, and in teaching. Each idea he shared, each insight he recorded, was a continuation of a journey that began in his childhood, a journey defined by curiosity, wonder, and the quiet determination to understand. In these final years, Stephen Hawking demonstrated that the measure of a life is not the absence of limitation, but the embrace of possibility. Though the body grows frail and time moves inexorably forward, the mind can remain luminous, tracing the infinite, bridging the gap between the finite and the eternal. And so, in Cambridge, under skies that had witnessed centuries of observation, thought, and discovery, Stephen Hawking lived his final years not in haste but in quiet reflection, curiosity, and enduring engagement with the cosmos. His life, like the universe he studied, was a delicate interplay of light, shadow, and infinite wonder, a testament to the boundless reach of intellect and the enduring rhythm of human curiosity. In the years approaching the close of his life, Stephen Hawking remained deeply engaged with both science and humanity. The public attention never waned, yet he met it with the same calm demeanor and reflective patience that had characterized decades of work. Each appearance, each lecture, each conversation was approached as an opportunity to share not only knowledge, but also the philosophy of living with curiosity and grace. His scientific endeavors continued with focus and clarity. Collaborations with colleagues explored the edges of theoretical physics, examining the subtle interactions between quantum mechanics and gravitational phenomena. His insights into black hole dynamics, the behavior of singularities, and the possibilities of multiverses were refined and shared with meticulous care. These contributions were more than equations on a page. They were the culmination of a lifetime spent contemplating the profound questions of existence. Even as his body weakened, Stephen found ways to remain connected to the world around him. Through technology, he continued to communicate complex ideas with ease, and his synthesized voice became a symbol not of limitation, but of the persistence of thought. It reminded everyone that intellect and imagination are not bound by physical constraints. The human aspect of his life, relationships, friendships, and interactions, remained central. Family, friends, students, and colleagues formed a supportive web that allowed him to continue his work and to share his wisdom. Amid the practical care and attention required by his condition, these relationships offered a gentle continuity, a reminder that life's meaning is intertwined with connection, as much as with inquiry. Public recognition reached its peak in these years. He was honored with awards, tributes, and accolades that celebrated both his scientific achievements and his role as an inspiration to humanity. Yet he accepted them quietly, with modesty, viewing them as markers of collective effort and shared curiosity, rather than personal triumph. Stephen also reflected openly on mortality and the passage of time. He considered life's brevity not as a limitation, but as a lens through which to appreciate the beauty and significance of existence. The universe, he once said, does not compel us to despair. It invites us to explore, to wonder, and to find meaning within the small, luminous moments of being. He remained deeply committed to education, mentoring students and inspiring young scientists worldwide. Through lectures, interviews, and writings, he encouraged others to embrace curiosity, to challenge assumptions, and to consider the larger questions of the cosmos with humility and wonder. In doing so, he ensured that his legacy would extend far beyond his own discoveries, becoming a guiding light for future generations. The philosophical dimension of his later years became increasingly prominent. He meditated on the interconnections between knowledge, existence, and consciousness. He saw the universe as both a scientific and existential teacher, its laws a framework for understanding, its vastness a mirror reflecting the potential and fragility of human life. Time, space, and the impermanence of matter were constant reminders of life's transient beauty. Yet in this impermanence, he discovered enduring meaning. Even in moments of public spectacle or media attention, he maintained serenity. His appearances were measured, thoughtful, and often infused with gentle humor. He understood that his voice, though mechanically produced, carried weight not through volume or theatrics, but through the clarity of insight, the warmth of intellect, and the resonance of a life fully engaged with curiosity and reflection. In Cambridge, as twilight fell and the stars appeared above, Stephen's life continued to embody the quiet rhythm of inquiry and observation. He reflected on the continuity of knowledge, that even as individuals pass, the pursuit of understanding, the spark of curiosity, and the ripple of insight endure. The universe, vast and unending, was both subject and companion in his contemplations. Toward the very end, Stephen remained an emblem of resilience, humility, and inspiration. His work had illuminated some of the deepest mysteries of the cosmos, yet he had also illuminated a path for living, a path defined by curiosity, patience, reflection, and the courage to embrace both limitation and possibility. He understood more profoundly than most that the measure of a life is not found in recognition alone, nor in the sum of discoveries, but in the enduring influence of thought, the nurturing of curiosity, and the quiet impact on those who observe, learn, and carry forward the torch of inquiry. In those final days, Stephen Hawking's presence was gentle but unwavering. The world knew him as a scientific luminary, yet those closest to him witnessed his reflective serenity, his humor, and the subtle grace that accompanied every interaction. The life he had lived was remarkable not only for achievement, but for the embodiment of patience, wonder, and intellectual courage. Even as his body finally yielded to the years of illness, his mind remained vibrant until the last. The questions that had inspired him since youth, about the origin of the universe, the nature of time, and the ultimate fate of existence, continued to flow through his thoughts. Though he would no longer speak them aloud, the ideas he shared, the curiosity he inspired, and the wisdom he imparted lived on. Stephen Hawking's final contributions were not measured only in papers, lectures, or accolades. They were measured in inspiration, in the enduring spark of inquiry he left behind, in the countless minds he touched and encouraged. His life demonstrated that even within limitation, the mind can soar across galaxies, navigate the curvature of space-time, and illuminate the deepest mysteries of existence. And so as the universe continued its endless dance of creation and decay, Stephen Hawking became part of its rhythm. A quiet, luminous presence whose questions, insights, and reflections continue to resonate across time, inspiring curiosity, wonder, and the enduring pursuit of knowledge. Stephen Hawking's life, as it drew to its natural close, became a meditation on the interplay between human limitation and intellectual expansiveness, between fleeting existence and timeless insight. His passing was felt not as an abrupt end, but as the gentle completion of a rhythm that had persisted across decades, a rhythm defined by inquiry, reflection, and the serene pursuit of understanding. In his final days, Stephen's surroundings were quiet, suffused with the soft glow of evening light filtering through windows. the faint rustle of papers, and the hum of machines that had faithfully conveyed his thoughts for years. It was in this stillness that the essence of his life was perhaps most palpable, a mind vast and luminous, unbounded by the confines of the body, gently exploring the universe even as time drew inexorably onward. The legacy he left behind was profound, layered, and enduring. In science, he transformed our understanding of black holes, the nature of space and time, and the early moments of the universe itself. Concepts that once seemed abstract and inaccessible, Hawking radiation, the dynamics of singularities, and the contours of the cosmos, became part of the language of modern physics, illuminating pathways for future generations of thinkers. Yet his influence extended far beyond equations and theories. Stephen Hawking embodied the power of curiosity as a force of life. His courage in the face of physical limitation, his unwavering commitment to understanding, and his ability to inspire awe in others created ripples that spread across the world. Students, scientists, and the public alike were drawn not only to his intellect, but to the philosophical grace with which he approached life and knowledge. He had taught humanity that the pursuit of understanding is both a personal and universal endeavor. The questions he asked, about time, the universe, and existence, were not only scientific, but deeply human. They reminded us that curiosity is a bridge between generations, a timeless current connecting minds across space and time. Even in popular culture, his presence resonated. Documentaries, films, and interviews brought his voice, a gentle, deliberate tone that had become iconic, to millions, translating complex ideas into contemplative stories. These portrayals, while public, retained the essence of his philosophy, that knowledge, humility, and wonder are intertwined, and that the act of questioning is as significant as the answers themselves. Stephen's life was also a testament to the interplay of resilience and reflection. He had lived decades with a body increasingly constrained by illness, yet he had nurtured a mind of extraordinary freedom. His experience showed that limitation need not define potential, that the scope of human achievement extends as far as curiosity and determination allow. Even as his physical presence diminished, the echo of his intellect and humanity continued to reverberate. Each lecture, each book, each carefully considered thought became part of a continuum, a thread in the tapestry of collective knowledge. Through these threads, Stephen Hawking's influence remains woven into the fabric of both science and human consciousness. His reflections on existence, time, and the cosmos continue to guide those who seek to understand not only the universe but themselves. He reminded us to look upward at the stars, to contemplate the vastness of creation, and to embrace the questions that spark curiosity and wonder. Through this lens, the universe becomes not only a subject of study, but a mirror reflecting our place within it, fleeting yet capable of insight, fragile yet radiant. Stephen's legacy is also found in the subtle, enduring encouragement of those around him. Students he taught, colleagues he collaborated with, and readers he inspired carry forward the ethos he championed. The patient pursuit of understanding, the embrace of curiosity, and the graceful navigation of life's limitations. His influence is not confined to the temporal bounds of his own existence. It persists in every mind he has touched, in every question sparked by his example. In the quiet contemplation of his life, one sees the delicate balance that defined it. The interplay of intellect and humanity, discovery and reflection, limitation and boundless thought. Stephen Hawking's journey illustrates that the measure of a life is not in fame, but in the light it leaves. A light that illuminates not just science but the human capacity for wonder, resilience, and thoughtful exploration. As his story concludes, it does so with serenity. There is no abrupt finality, no dramatic flourish, only the soft continuation of the rhythm he embodied. Curiosity flowing into understanding, reflection merging with action, the fleeting nature of life harmonized with the enduring resonance of thought. And so in the vast, silent expanse of the universe he so loved to contemplate, Stephen Hawking's life remains a gentle beacon. His questions continue to ripple across minds and generations. His insights endure in the structures of science. His philosophy whispers in the stillness of reflection. That knowledge is beautiful, Curiosity is sacred, and the pursuit of understanding is a luminous thread connecting all of existence. If you enjoyed this quiet journey through Stephen Hawking's life, you may find peace in exploring other stories of those who shaped our understanding of the universe. The stars above, the equations left behind, and the endless questions yet to be asked are all part of the legacy of a life fully illuminated by curiosity, courage, and reflection.